thank you very much to Simeon and to Mark. And today we're talking with Simeon as a deaf person who has his own experiences of inclusion or not inclusion. Thank you, Simeon, for joining us. And a few questions that we've looked at.
My pleasure.
And I'll start off with question number one. So, Simeon, as a deaf person, you have clearly experienced lack of inclusion, more than many of us have. So why do you feel that organizations are not as inclusive as they could be in the workplace? Why are organizations not as inclusive as they could be?
Yeah, for me, it's very simple, the answer to this question. Before, I used to work as in software, and I used to work for a company. It was actually my first job. Now, the problem was that I experienced on a daily basis was the work was, be very, very focused on the work at hand. At the time, I was doing desktop publishing. And so it's what I was doing in this role and at the time. And so I'd work on various pieces, so graphics, etc., and on books. And when I finished my work on a daily basis, I'd always finish it early, ahead of what was expected. My boss would say, "Oh no, you're working too quickly." And I'd say, "Well, that's going to be an obvious thing because when I'm working, those around me, my work colleagues, they're hearing and they will be talking with one another instead of working." But I'm never included in those conversations. Conversations would happen around me, and I would be excluded. I wouldn't know what was being discussed, what the topic of conversation was. I'd have no idea at all. So I'd just press on with my work, and then my boss would say, "Oh, hang on," and then I'd get extra work because I'd finished early. And you think, well, that's interesting, isn't it? You just think, how little things like that can happen around you. So I remember my boss approaching me once with a piece of paper and, had brief notes on a piece of paper. And he handed me these notes. And if I wasn't sure on anything that he was asking me to do, I would go back and he had no idea how to communicate with me at all. And so I'd try and engage with him. And sometimes, I think I've got hold of the concepts that he wants me to do, but mainly because I'd had to go and do extra work to understand what was being required. So that was one thing. Staff meetings, everyone would be drawn together for a staff meeting, and I would be excluded. I would have no idea, what was happening because they wouldn't have provided any interpreters in those meetings. And even being presented with paperwork to read or anything like that, there's nothing like that afforded to me. To help, I was just left out. And I remember this is 30 years ago. So I mean, things have changed, but now, I suppose most of the work out there with different contracts that I've done, it's been the same old problems. People will talk around me and exclude me. As a result, they wouldn't include me in those conversations. I mean, with this is like something that was happening 30 years ago, but that's still happening today. People having conversations without that sense of inclusion.
And I imagine, Simeon, that a lot of people would want to include a deaf person, but they are unsure. They don't know how. So they become used to working around the deaf person in this example. And the deaf person then is left with a world which is based on writing, instructions, the work to be done. Even discussing the work to be done, I guess, doesn't happen very much either. So exclusion from the social conversation, but also exclusion from the work conversation. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we're talking about how things are now. I mean, things are the same. They're the same issues that deaf people face. And one of the issues at hand is that there's this over-reliance on interpreters now, which is problematic. I can't expect an interpreter to be available to me 9 till 5 every day. That's an impossibility. And so the interpreters themselves, they need breaks. And so, but then when you get to that break and the interpreter's not available, I'm now isolated. And so in the work environment, people don't try and accommodate me. They would think, well, I'll wait till the interpreter gets back. And I think, you don't need to do that. You don't need to wait for the interpreter to return before you can communicate with me. But that is a persisting issue in the workplace. Yeah. And I found that actually that's true for many deaf people, that they'll wait for the interpreter to return before trying to converse with a deaf person. But I suppose if the interpreter is there, sometimes what can happen is the interpreter will try and pick up on what's being said around them. But people will speak at quite a fast pace sometimes. And so it's a struggle for the interpreter to pick up everything. So they might just summarize things for me. Or sometimes the interpreter will step in and say, sorry, what are you saying? I just want to include Simeon in this. And so some people will do that, but they'll only then talk briefly about a matter because they're being asked to include me. And then they're off. They don't want to entertain me anymore. Sure. So, and I think that's not full inclusion.
Yeah,
that's a real difference.
Yeah. And what you're saying, what I am understanding is that a lot of people at work don't feel included. For example, I was talking to a woman who said she doesn't feel included with other women at work because she doesn't have children. And the conversation with the other women at work is often about family, and she doesn't have a family. So there are many, many examples where there is a feeling of not being included. Your example is very...
Yeah, sorry. So I was just going to say on that you're right, absolutely. And I think, but they can still be party to what's being discussed.
Yeah, exactly.
Where for a deaf person, they can't. I mean,
exactly.
That's the difference.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is your example is an extreme picture of what not being included feels like. And I'm wondering to use that picture because it's very powerful. What you're saying is very powerful. We can imagine this bypassing that's happening for a deaf person. And yes, it is much stronger than the lady example that I gave you of the lady who didn't feel included. It's much stronger. So I'm wondering, what pressure does it bring to you in experiencing lack of inclusion? What are the pressures that you then experience as a result?
I suppose, the opportunities at work. Once I've done my work, you think, okay, well, what's next? I've done my task, but there's no information available to me. I want to be able to talk about that. And, I want to be able to talk about what extra work there is. And then that places the pressure on me because that leads to stress. It leads to worry because it leaves me thinking I could lose my job because I'm not doing extra work. I'm just there because I'm getting work done. But then there's a pressure on me. And that's something I've experienced in the past, that pressure is not being able to talk to anyone after I've done my work and think, well, now what do I do? And, companies or, your manager should be able to be on hand to have a conversation, but that's not available to me. So that leads to a level of stress. And in many environments, many deaf people find themselves in situations where their mental health deteriorates because of this presenting issue. And interpreters may not be available to them. And some days you will find that they might have an interpreter all day because of a scenario for that particular day. And that affects their mental health. That I've met many people who say in mental health hospitals, deaf people have been admitted. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to have coped through these situations, but many people haven't been able to cope when they found themselves in hospitals. And, and I think I'm reflective on that. So the way I'm very grateful for having people like my father. I come from a deaf family, and my father had similar experiences, and he was a role model for me. I was able to learn from him about how to find your own solutions, how to manage that, and I'm grateful for that. Very grateful, but you still feel the pressures that even now, I'm self-employed, and when I'm teaching at the university, I feel the pressure. I have to make sure that everything is spot on because I need that contract to be maintained.
So there are pressures I did not imagine in this, the employment pressure, needing to perform, for example. So to bring it to the point of the interview, from your experience, Simeon, what is your advice to managers in organizations to improve the experience of inclusion? This is for everybody, absolutely deaf people, also everybody else. What is the attitude as a manager that we should have to improve inclusion in your experience?
Yeah, I think the first thing would be that sense of get trained, that they need training, that there's most don't have that. A lot of people will say they'll take somebody on and they'll have disability awareness, and they'll say, okay, right, we've done that now, and then they're off. They need to be in it. They don't need to be leaving their staff to be trained. They also need to be trained. And I know when I've done bookings in the past, that the manager would have arranged the training, but they're not there. And I'll ask them, I'll say, you're not going to be part of the training. They say, oh, no, I'm sorry, I can't be there. Right. Say, but you need to be there to manage better. And I think people can be very reluctant to do that. That can be an issue of ego. They think, well, I'm the boss, I know better. So that can be a barrier, and that maintains as an issue that can be maintained in the workplace. So my other advice would be to keep it fun. Learn sign language, but do it in a fun way, or about people's disabilities, and have a great awareness. But it's easy enough to do it. It's easy enough to gain knowledge from the internet, from watching clips. You can gain this knowledge now. It's easily accessible. Just to become more open-minded, to make sure that people are integrated, that people are included, that will help. And so that's a big area, and that may not be happening necessarily now.
Well, look, Simeon, those points are really powerful, and I think the example of the deaf is just so vivid for us to see what exclusion looks like and how it might be experienced. And so what the way you explain it is very, very powerful, and I think it's a very good picture of a world we want to improve. So I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time. Is there any last message that you have for us, final message that you have for us as we close this interview?
I would love to see managers at every level, to top levels, for them to be aware and to have a positive attitude, to be inclusive, to be open to learning, and also to include those who are in their organization, that people can be treated equally, because it benefits everybody. And it isn't we've got to think about how everyone can be included. We can't be excluding people from learning. Everyone has to keep learning.
That's fantastic, and thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for interpreting. Simeon, above all, thank you very much for your time, and we will talk some more.
Great. I look forward to it.